"Don't put your hand in there." The words came too late. The rancher had already reached into the darkness, fingers brushing something cold and alive, and in that instant his breath locked in his chest. He didn't scream, he didn't pull away. He simply froze because whatever was in there was closer to his heart than any gunfight he'd ever survived, and if he made the wrong move, the past he'd spent a lifetime outrunning would finally catch him. The old ranch sat where the prairie bent toward the hills, a lonely spread of weathered wood and wind-scarred fences that groaned at night like they remembered better days. Elias Crow had built it with his own hands after the war, hammering nails, as if each strike could pin his ghost to the ground. Folks in town said he was quiet because he was mean, but the truth was quieter still. He was careful with words because words had once cost him everything. Elias lived by routines. Sunrise meant coffee boiled too long, boots pulled on without looking, and a slow walk to the barn where the smell of hay and horses steadied his thoughts. He trusted habits more than people. Habits didn't lie, they didn't leave. That morning started like any other, until he found the gate hanging open. The latch lay in the dirt, snapped clean, and his best mare, Juniper, was gone from her stall. Elias felt the old tightening in his chest, the one he'd felt years ago when everything went wrong in a single afternoon. He followed the tracks out, past the corral, past the cottonwoods, until they vanished near the dry arroyo. Someone had been on his land. By noon the sun pressed down hard, and Elias returned to the ranch to gather supplies. That was when he noticed the trunk in the tack room, the one he hadn't opened in years. It sat beneath a shelf of saddles, half hidden like it hoped to be forgotten. Inside were things from another life, a folded letter never sent, a badge he no longer wore, and a small velvet pouch he'd sworn never to touch again. He knelt, lifted the lid, and hesitated. "Don't put your hand in there," he muttered to himself, but habit pushed him forward. His fingers slid past the cold metal of the badge, brushed the velvet, and then touched something else. Something warm, something that moved. Time slowed to the width of a heartbeat. Elias froze, mind racing. Not with fear of death, but with memory of a younger man who'd reach without thinking, who'd believed he could fix anything fast enough. He remembered the day his brother died because Elias had acted instead of listened. The thing inside the trunk shifted again. Elias breathed slow and shallow. And for the first time in years, he didn't reach for control. He waited. The barn door creaked, and a small voice cut through the heat. "Mr. Crow," it was Thomas, the orphan boy from town who traded chores for meals and followed Elias around with questions. Too big for his age, Elias didn't move, didn't even turn his head. "Stay where you are," he said evenly. "And don't come closer." Thomas obeyed, eyes wide. "What is it?" Elias listened, not with his eyes or hands, but with his breath. The movement in the trunk wasn't coiled menace. It was frantic, irregular. He eased the lid open another inch and saw not a rattlesnake, not a trap of any kind, but a trembling fox kit. Its leg caught in a rusted spring snare. Long forgotten, someone had hidden it there. Maybe to come back later, maybe to sell it, or maybe just to see if it would survive. Elias swallowed carefully. Slowly he spoke to the animal, the way no one had ever spoken to him. When he was young, soft, patient. He reached again, this time with intention, easing the trap open, despite the bite of old metal into his palm. The fox bolted the moment it was free, a flash of red disappearing into the tall grass. Thomas let out a breath he'd been holding. "You saved it." Elias looked at the blood on his hand, at the trunk, at the boy. "No," he said. "I learned how to stop hurting things by accident." Together they tracked Juniper and found her tangled in brush near the arroyo, spooked but unharmed as the sun dipped low. Elias realized something had shifted, not the land, not the past, but the way he carried both. That night he burned the old snare and buried the badge. He left the trunk open. The days after the fox felt different, though nothing on the ranch had changed. The fences still leaned. The wind still sang through the grass at night, but Elias noticed things he'd trained himself not to see: the way the sky blushed before dawn, the way Juniper's ears flicked when he spoke her name, the way Thomas watched him like a man watching a map out of a hard country. Words spread that Elias Crow had been seen in town. Again, some said age had softened him. Others said trouble always circled men who kept to themselves too long. Trouble proved them right when it rode in on a dust cloud. One afternoon, 3 men dismounted near the corral, their horses restless, their eyes sharp. The one in front wore a smile too easy to trust. He tipped his hat. "Heard you found something that wasn't yours," he said. "A fox. A mare, maybe more." Elias didn't reach for his rifle. He leaned on the fence instead. "You heard wrong," the man smiled thin. "Funny thing about rumors, they tend to lead to truths people bury behind." Elias. Thomas stiffened. Elias felt it. The old urge to act fast, to strike first, to end the threat before it grew. The same instinct that had once turned a bad moment into a lifetime of regret. He breathed. "I buried enough," Elias said, not adding more. The men glanced at one another. They had expected fear or violence. They hadn't expected stillness. In the end, stillness unsettled them more than any gun. They rode off, promising to return, but their voices lacked conviction. That night, Elias sat on the porch with Thomas, stars spilling across the sky. "Why didn't you fight?" the boy asked. "Because not every hand needs to reach," Elias replied. "Some just need to stay open." Winter came early, harsh and unforgiving. A storm rolled in that pinned the ranch under white silence, cutting off the road to town. When a neighboring homestead sent up a smoke signal, 3 short plumes, Elias saddled Juniper without hesitation. Thomas followed. They found the homesteader, trapped beneath a fallen beam, breath shallow, fear deep. Elias remembered another man under wreckage years ago, remembered how rushing had cost precious time. This time he moved slow, steady, teaching Thomas where to place his hands, when to lift, when to wait. They saved the man before the storm swallowed the valley. By spring, the ranch no longer felt like a place of hiding. It felt like a place of learning. Elias taught Thomas to mend fences, to read weather, to listen more than he spoke. In return, the boy taught Elias something he hadn't known. He'd forgotten how to imagine a future without flinching. One evening, Elias returned to the tack room. The trunk still sat open, empty now. No traps, no secrets. He ran his hand along the wood and didn't freeze. Outside, a fox darted across the field. Red against green, free spring softened the land. But it did not soften memory. It simply brought it into clearer light. Elias woke one morning to the sound of hooves again. But this time there was no dust cloud, no threat riding on the wind. It was Sheriff Caleb Hargreaves, older now, heavier in the shoulders, but with the same eyes that once looked at Elias across a blood-soaked street and said nothing at all. They stood facing each other by the fence, 2 men bound by a silence that had lasted 20 years. "I heard you pulled a man out from under a beam." The sheriff said. "He lived." Elias nodded. He listened. Caleb exhaled slowly. "That day back then, you reached when you shouldn't have. I should have stopped you." Elias looked out over the field, where Thomas was trying and failing to mend a fence. "Straight, we both did what we thought was right. That's what makes it heavy." The sheriff reached into his coat and pulled out an old envelope, yellowed at the edges. "Your brother wrote this. Never mailed it. He meant for you to have it." Elias's hand trembled as he took it. For a moment, the world narrowed to the paper between his fingers. He wanted to open it. He wanted to run from it. Instead, he did neither. "Thank you," he said simply. That night, Elias read the letter by lantern light. It wasn't full of forgiveness or grand words. It was small, ordinary, a reminder to slow down, to think twice, to trust that not everything needed fixing by force. Elias folded the letter carefully and placed it where the badge once lay. Summer brought heat and hardship. A drought crept in, thinning the grass. Drying the creek, ranchers began to argue over water, old tensions boiling to the surface. Elias found himself at the center of it, whether he wanted to be or not. One afternoon, tempers flared near the creek bank. A young man shoved another. Hands moved toward weapons. The Old West rhythm threatened to take over. Elias stepped between them. "Don't," he said. Not loud, not angry, just firm. They stared at him, surprised. This wasn't the man they remembered, the quiet recluse with a violent past. This was someone else, someone steady. "There's enough water if we take turns," Elias continued. "There isn't enough ground for all the graves. Rushing will make slowly hands lowered. Voices softened, a rotation was agreed upon. That evening Thomas asked, "How did you know they'd listen?" Elias watched the sunset bleed gold across the land. "Because I finally learned to." The boy grew taller, his questions grew sharper. One night sitting beside the fire, he asked the one Elias had been expecting, "Why did you really stay out here alone all those years?" Elias stared into the flames. "Because I thought if I kept my hands busy, they wouldn't reach for the wrong things again." Thomas considered that. "But you still help people." "Only when I had to, maybe." The boy said carefully, "Helping is what keeps your hands steady." Elias felt something loosen inside his chest. Not break, not vanish. Just ease. He realized then that the ranch had stopped being a refuge from the world. It had become a place within it. The day Thomas left for school in town came quietly. No speeches, no promises that hurt. To keep, Elias packed food, fixed the boy's collar, and watched him ride off on a borrowed horse. The tack room felt emptier that evening, but not hollow. Elias closed the trunk at last. Not to hide anything, but because there was nothing left to fear inside it. He stepped outside as the stars appeared one by one. Just as they always had, the West was built by hands. Hands that built homes, hands that raised fences, hands that also made terrible mistakes. But what history rarely tells is that the future is shaped just as much by the moments when those hands pause. Elias Crow learned that healing doesn't come from never reaching again. It comes from learning when to reach, when to wait, and when to let go. Whatever darkness you face, remember this: the strongest choice is not always action. Sometimes it is the courage to stop, breathe, and trust that patience can save what force never could.